Good evening, everyone. And I know a lot of people are joining, so we're going to be starting this webinar in 1 or 2 minutes.
We've got 27 so far, Gary.
Yep. Hi, everyone who's joining. Really appreciate you being with us this evening. We're going to be starting in the next couple of minutes. We're just waiting for quite a few more people to join. So thanks for your patience, but we will be starting in the next couple of minutes.
Good names here, Gary.
Yeah, exactly.
A few I know too, gosh, oh dear.
I'll ask you questions.
I bet. I bet.
Hi everyone, we're gonna start in 2 minutes exactly. Thanks for your patience. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. Good. We're going to start this webinar now. So firstly, a very big welcome to all of you. My name is Gary Lubner. I am chairman of Africa Tikkun here in the UK. I'm in London. I'm also chief executive of Belron. And it's a pleasure for us to be hosting the first of 3 webinars this evening. And the reason that we are, as Africa Tikkun, hosting these webinars is that we wanted to really try and hear from the world, the thought leaders from the world of philanthropy, business, technology, as well as some amazing NGOs and charitable organizations, to hear from them how they have seen their worlds change as a result of COVID-19. As a business person, the last 17 weeks has certainly been the most dramatic that I've ever had in my business career. And we have seen some major, major changes. But I think it's slight in comparison to what we've seen in the world of NGOs, charitable organizations, many of whom have been really put in untenable situations. And part of this series is to try and understand how we as philanthropists, how we as business people can actually help create equality or more equality than we have at the moment. And tonight we've got 2 fantastic speakers. We have Christopher Holder, who's sitting in the Bahamas, or sorry, in Barbados.
Barbados.
Christopher has been a long-time supporter of Africa Tikkun. He is a very much under the radar, but huge philanthropist. He looks after the Maria Marina Foundation, as well as the Maria Holder Memorial Trust. He also sits on the board of Medicorps and the UBS Optimus Foundation. And he has a wealth of experience in the world of philanthropy.
Thank
We're
you.
also joined by someone who's a little bit closer to home, and I'm delighted that my cousin Mark, who many of you will know, the Chief Executive of Africa Tikkun, he has been absolutely instrumental in making Africa Tikkun one of the foremost NGOs, not only in South Africa, but in the world. He has made such a difference for so many thousands of people, and he has been at the absolute forefront of pivoting a charitable organization into something that has literally saved lives over the last number of weeks. And so it's a great pleasure to have both of you here this evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
What I would like to do before handing over to you guys is to show a very, very short video, which I think kind of puts into perspective exactly what we are facing as NGOs, but also puts into perspective what young people are facing during this crisis, and in particular, how technology can both disrupt and enable things to be a little bit better. So Claire, if you wouldn't mind just playing the video, and then Mark, I'll ask you for some comments around that. Thanks, Claire.
My challenges during this lockdown is that I don't actually have internet, don't actually have smartphones and laptops or computers to learn at home, and the signal at home is actually weak.
I am Jessica Kekana. I live at Alexander Township and I attend the CYD program at Africa Tikkun.
If I could actually have internet at home, I could actually learn more on what I want to be in the future, learn more about lawyers. I'm Anez Mabunda. I live in Alex Township. I'm a CYD learner in Africa Tikkun. Africa Tikkun actually has a big open space for me to actually learn there.
If only I could have access to resources like tablets or phones that can equip me with knowledge of pursuing my dream of being an environmental engineer.
Great, thanks very much. Just before I hand over to Mark, just as the moderator, so I've got the unenviable task of keeping things moving tonight. We are going to end absolutely promptly at 8:30 South African time. And by the way, I did want to just welcome, I can see people from the US, from South Africa, from the UK, or from all over the world. I'm not going to go through all the different countries. So a huge, huge welcome to all of you. Mark, perhaps you would just start by just sharing some of the experiences that you had, particularly as we went into this crisis, and in particular, perhaps what role technology has played. So over to you.
Yeah, Gary, I think, first of all, many, many thanks for hosting this to Carol, to Claire. It's certainly appreciated. In living in a time of such insecurity, quite frankly, knowing that there are people like yourselves across the globe and supporters like Christopher makes certainly us feel a lot more safe and secure. The biggest impact I think that this COVID virus has had is it's made us realize that we're operating in areas which are relatively uncharted. We've never ever had previously to deal with some of the crises, simply because we've had the ability to provide services from centers that are based within the heart of these townships. With those centers closing, it literally turned our operations on their head. We no longer were able to bring kids, youth to our centers to provide the various services that we provide in their development. we now had to necessarily provide those services to them on a remote basis. And I could only suggest that that has brought out an enormous sense of both innovation and, in fact, disruption. And I differentiate between the two. So innovation in the sense that we still get homework to these kids in the thousands by providing food packs and including the homework assignments within those food packs. And so that we start this process of collecting manually conducted education. And equally, disruption from the point of view that we've had to try and find ways to use tech to actually get messages out into the community, first and foremost, what to do with the COVID scenario, how best to curtail the spread of the virus and deal with the issue of fear. And once dealing with that, then at least give confidence that these kids will not necessarily backtrack to such a level that they will not be able to catch up again. And therein lies probably some of our greatest challenges. So we've been digitizing a lot of the content work that we've got, and we're trying to find different ways and means to actually export that data by working with some of the larger cell phone operators. But there's a massive shortage. The shortage is, in fact, having the equipment available to be able to communicate with many of the wards that typically would have come to our centres previously. We've had to become very much more oriented towards food security. Before we made 1.8 million meals at our centres and we could distribute the food at our centres. Now we've had to necessarily provide some 70,000 families with a month's supply of food in the hope that that would at least buy some time before we could find longer term sustainable solutions. So challenging, very, very challenging, but at the same time, commend the team of people around me who show that through passion and through being nimble and delft, they are able to innovate and at the same time, create disruptive ways to still address the needs of the communities we serve.
Great, Mark. Thanks very much. Christopher, I wonder whether you wouldn't mind commenting on, from a philanthropist point of view, I'm sure you've been inundated with requests from various organizations, various charities. What is it perhaps that you're looking for now in these very uncertain times? As a philanthropist, I'm guessing you're having to come up with different criteria for who you want to support or who you can support, who's going to make the biggest difference. Perhaps you could just share some of the experiences that you've had, perhaps even with other organizations that you're involved in.
Yeah, Gary, a good set of questions there. I wasn't expecting those, but anyway, thank you. I think COVID, it hit us all like a meteor. It just was bang. It was a big firework display. Everything went everywhere. And we all kind of ran for cover. Where will we feel most secure? I took my family out to the Caribbean, to Barbados. We felt secure here, and we've got through it. 4 months here has been unprecedented amount of time I think most people have spent anywhere. And we soon realized that we had to look at how our projects, and as you pointed out, I sit on a number of boards, as how our projects were going to be affected by this, that the NGOs, they just couldn't deliver. They couldn't deliver what was set out. And we went to them collectively and say, we will listen to you. We need to understand what your needs are. The first thing that came through clearly, as you pointed out, Mark, was food security. That was massive, because particularly in South Africa, one of the biggest things that any project got, the children were fed. They're possibly their only, but certainly the most nourishing meal of the day was at the centres. Secondly, there were the issues of how can they actually communicate with those students, try and teach them remotely. So technology came in very, very quickly then, and we have one particular project which is in Stellenbosch, Pinotage, and that they train students to go into the wine and hospitality industry. Now, they were like, okay, how do we do this? Yes, let's do it digitally. They can't come to the center. They were housing 30, 40 people. Now, with technology, they are able to reach a far wider audience. So that's been a major plus point. So really, we've gathered together everything from our partners, and we always work on the basis that we're working with people from up to 3 years. So we know, and it's looking at their needs. But then what you have to remember is that when the dust settles, and it will settle, this will pass, the projects that we originally agreed to support will still need to be implemented. So money that's been diverted for emergency, as I say, food security, etc., they're going to come back to us and go, can we have that money now? And that's the next dilemma that we've all got to look at, not just us, but any other organization. And that will potentially put a big hole in your grant making in the months, even the next year to come. Because, I mean, say at Maria Foundation, we know what we knew in January already how our funds for the year were going to be spent. We've planned that far ahead. So suddenly there's been requests for hundreds of thousands of dollars, rand, pounds, whichever, have come in. It's like, okay, we've now got to switch things around. So there's going to be a little bit of jostling going on, Gary, Mark, everybody, once the dust settles, is how funds will be redistributed by philanthropists.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just chip in from a business point of view, because I think there are a huge amount of similarities. So what we found was that we suddenly, exactly as you describe, I mean, from one day or from one weekend to the Monday, we found our business going from going really, really well to suddenly 70, 80% below the previous year. And I think one of our learnings has certainly been how we've responded as a business to the crisis. And what I'm hearing a lot from investors, banks, etc., is that those people are looking at businesses now to see how did they respond during the crisis, how agile were they, how flexible were they. And once we do come out of this, and I agree with you, we are going to come out of this, it's going to be those organizations that I think showed the most agility and flexibility that will attract both the investors and the new investors for the future. And Mark, I'm guessing from a Tikkun point of view, you seeing the same sort of thing. Just building on Christopher's point, you've appealed for money literally to feed people on a daily basis, and that's you've appealed to the same donors. But now you're going to be going back to those donors to say, hopefully, once this comes good, we need to restart those programs. Have you got any feeling from your donors how they're feeling about Africa Tikkun and how they're viewing organizations like and the work that you've done in the crisis?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's a lot of positive. We have been able to show that we can deliver that last mile. So, what's been very interesting here in South Africa is government has put money into initiatives called Solidarity Fund, government grants and stuff like that. But then they've gone in and imposed lockdowns. So, people can't go out and access necessarily their food sources. So all of a sudden there's been this reliance on organizations that have got their footprint and the presence and the trust within the communities to be able to give effect to delivery. And efficient delivery in the sense that because we're close on the ground, we have systems in place that ensures there's no double dipping. People aren't standing in one line at one NGO and then coming to collect at another. We are able to prevent the sale of foodstuffs, for argument's sake, the resale of foodstuffs. And at the same time, what we've been able to do, which I think is such a positive for the future, just two quick issues. One is we've been able to collaborate together with government and the private sector in such a way as to optimize impact, number one. And number two, what this scenario of COVID has done is it's brought the issue of poverty to the top of the agenda everywhere. 6 months ago, we were talking about youth unemployment as a key critical crisis, and it certainly still is. It hasn't gone away. But we're starting to realize that if we're going to be dealing with something as broad as food security for some 16, 17 million grant recipients, we've got to find ways to collaborate. Government has proved that they can't do it on their own. No one civil society organization can, and certainly no one corporate can. But collectively, we've been able to keep the wolf from the door for this last 8-9 weeks. And that bodes very well for the future when we come to address things like youth education, health issues within these impoverished communities. Because we're carving new pathways to collaborate. And that's, in fact, I think, very, very encouraging, very positive. Yeah, it's a storm at the moment, but going forward, I think a lot of these relationships of codependency are going to, I think, turn out to be better for us all.
So, Mark, does that mean when things get back to normal, do you think Africa Tikkun are going to be doing different things, or going to?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, you know, one of the things we've realized is that our footprint, called it 20,000 direct beneficiaries at our centers, are now going back to homes, and they're having to share within their homes similar situations, lack of education, lack of infrastructure, etc. So we're realizing we have to address a much broader audience than just those kids who are coming to our centers, or those kids that we're reaching through our outreach programs into schools. We've got to take our model now, as a matter of urgency, this concept of developing from an early stage through successive life phases to ultimately where we get kids, youth into jobs and or businesses of their own for which they're well suited. We've now got to expand that and take into consideration other factors like what's happening with the rest of their families. And all of a sudden, instead of 20,000, you know, multiply that now by 5, and our target market effectively becomes 100,000. If we do an effective job.
Mark, it's interesting what you said. I read some statistics the other day about the impact of COVID, particularly on education, and with across the globe, apparently 1.5 billion students, so that's university and beyond, up to have been affected by this, and that they have not been able to be in the classroom. And that is a huge, if those figures are correct, that is a huge amount. So you can see the amount of work that is going to be required by so many organizations.
So perhaps if we...
Crispin, if I may, it's not just a function of providing the educational content in the manner in which it was provided before. We're going to have to change that content. Human beings are social animals. Homo sapiens, if you read the Yuval Harari philosophy on how did we come effectively to be the species that dominates the world, is through our social interactions. So this distance learning has to now start to give thought to how do we manage that desire by human beings to socially connect once again. And I think that that's going to be reflected in not only the content that we teach, but the manner in which we have these exchanges. So just for argument's sake, from a tech perspective, one-way communication is no longer going to necessarily be effective. You're going to have pipes that are big enough to have data that is capable of actually flowing to and from. And so the demand for very much more sophisticated technology, data delivery systems is going to be there.
Yeah. I mean, Christopher, maybe just building again on that, and particularly from a technology point of view. I mean, I think we've all seen, and tonight's a great example. I mean, the thought of having a webinar with nearly 100 people, even 4 months ago, discussing this sort of thing was probably, you know, it just wouldn't have happened. I mean, certainly in the business world, the whole technology, the Zoom culture, all of that has totally transformed the way we've worked. And I think with very positive outputs, but also some negative outputs. But Christopher, what I'm interested from you is, particularly in the other organizations that you're involved in, how has technology helped in this time, and what is going to happen afterwards? Can we build on it, or is it going to be back to where we were?
Gary, certainly we can build on it. I mean, technology has enabled so much to have happened in the last 4 months. If this would have happened even 10 years ago, the world would have been in a much worse situation. Yeah. But today, technology, not only in terms of spreading the news, messaging, but actually the way that the NGOs are working, and they're using technology beyond where they thought they would be using it today. The tragedy in all of this is that so many learners or people that you want to reach, you can't. Your video emphasized that. I don't have access to what is now considered normal for all of us listening and watching now, is access to the internet and high-speed access. And that is something where governments and industry need to look at. So you need the big boys, the Apples, the Microsofts, to step in and say, okay, we will provide, and the telecommunication company, we will provide cheap, fast access to these rural areas to enable these people to have access to whatever, whether it's education, whether it's bereavement counseling, whatever. I mean, bereavement counseling has just gone through the roof.
Yeah.
You've got millions of people who haven't been able to properly grieve as a result of issues with not being able to attend funerals. And we're involved in that area. Addiction, gone through the roof. Addiction issues gone through the roof. In South Africa, he's just banned the sale of alcohol again because you're not responsible imbibers. But I think that was what Ramaphosa says. But these are the issues, and the counsellors are going to have to work with people remotely. There's going to be an increased requirement for counsellors. Normally, you work one-to-one with your client. They're going to have to do a lot of this over the phone, and that's going to be a lot of people are on edge. Do you want to be on the phone to someone you don't know who's listening, watching, happening? So there will be challenges, but I feel technology will play a major part and has done successfully so far, Gary.
Yeah, and so Mark, because we're getting quite a lot of questions coming in, and please, just to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, please just go on the Q&A button on your screen and type them in, and we'll try and answer them. So Mark, before I move on to the questions, I think what both you and Christopher are saying, and I think what is increasingly clear, is that the future is going to have to be a partnership between the state, business, and NGOs, all bringing, we talked about the technology, the state bringing the infrastructure, the NGOs doing often a lot of the service delivery, and business playing its part, whether that's in giving or in providing services. How does that feel in South Africa, which is obviously where all of our work is focused from Africa Tikkun's point of view? How are you feeling about that partnership working post-COVID?
Gary, the answer to that one is we're going to have to kind of figure it out as we go along, quite honestly. The reality is that politics invariably gets in the way and stuffs things up. And so long as the agenda remains an issue of what's best for the people and the result of the urgency of the situation. The reality is government at this particular point in time is really on a precipice, because when people are not being fed, frustrations, never mind the fact that they haven't got jobs, there are no prospects for the future, the political party in power today must be very concerned about what's necessarily lying, a few steps ahead of them. And so they have to have some wins. So it's almost bringing together parties who might not necessarily collaborate in the way in which they should together. That being said, there are some amazing initiatives going on in South Africa. This Department of Social Development is headed up by a woman who believes that the future lies in investing in the individuals of South Africa who create the South Africa one, rather than just simply government building more structures themselves, which is a very much more enlightened way to think about the country, because it recognizes that the whole civil society plays a role in building the South Africans that we want. So I think we're going to have to figure out a lot of the power dynamics. As I said, during this particular point in time, civil society has become that much more important because we do deliver on that last mile. And at the same time, it's not just about having enough money. So Solidarity Fund had fortunes of money, but they didn't have delivery agents. So they had to find NGOs like ourselves to give effect to the delivery of those food parcels. Also, I feel that there's a lot more feedback. There's a lot more recognition. What I mean by that is there's a lot more recognition of community-based organizations that have been around prior to COVID. They're becoming much more relevant in this whole issue of delivery. So it should not be ignored and be part and parcel the community and its needs are now being able to be, their information is being fed back through these community-based organizations. It's interesting times. But okay. I'm just finding wherever I turn an attitude of mind amongst people, lay people, who are looking for solutions and looking for ways to optimize.
Yeah. The Lubna fact, can I just, I'm just looking at one of the messages just being sent. This is Teresa Muller saying, not just access to the internet, electricity is a huge problem in townships. I hadn't put two and two together there. So that's true. Without electricity, you're not going to get your internet connections, everything like that. So again, it's two industries are going to have to get together to help. And it's a global issue, not just the township South Africa. You've got the rural areas of Asia, India, South America, and beyond that are clearly very adversely affected by this. And I've been to these places. They're big issues. But thank you for pointing that out, Therese. Thank you.
So Christopher, so I'm moving on to some of the questions because there's some great questions and they're certainly a lot better than mine. This is a good one, I think, which I think we can all relate to. Smaller NGOs, smaller charities have, either because they haven't got the depth of leadership or management, or just by their size, have and are falling by the wayside, despite the fact that many of them are doing unbelievable work, really, really on the ground work. How can we as philanthropists, how can we as business people, how do we choose? How do we decide which are the NGOs that are going to make it and which ones won't? Christopher, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Gary, thank you. I think in the words of Darwin, those who are capable of adapting will survive. However, I think for these very small NGOs and particularly charities that have just started in the past few years, they are facing massive headwinds. If their resilience is there, if the partners behind them and the funders behind them believe in what they set out to do, they should come through this. There will be a halt, 4 months, 6 months, we can't do anything, but the need will still be there post-COVID or when we get back to some normality. So if the desire is still there by those NGOs, they'll push through and make it work. And that's where grantees like us have to come and look at these people and say, okay, yeah, you had a good business model, COVID messed it up, but we can still see that there is traction possible here, and we will support you. It's a leap of faith, but the true philanthropist will look at that, and philanthropy is not only understanding the need, but understanding how that business is and looking at figures, accounts. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do any budgets at the moment. I mean, how can you do budgets in this global environment? But we have to look at them. Yeah, I think some will fall by the wayside, but the majority of them will survive, Gary, is my view.
Okay, good. So just maybe...
anyone disagree with me? Possibly.
Well, listen, I think unfortunately where there's a need, there are going to be NGOs. It's just how do we make sure we get money to them and that they can use that properly. Mark, sorry.
Gary, quick comment, just if I may. And I know this is not going to be a very popular statement, but there's huge redundancy in our sector. We all love to do our own thing, which means we've all got to employ our own financial staff, fundraising staff, etc., etc. And even those, I'm doing a little punt for obviously Tikkun, our operating costs, are well below 8% of total monies raised. In fact, closer to about 5% at the moment. The reality of it is, though, is that we, Africa Tikkun, let's assume other NGOs around us fail. There's still a need and the demand. So how do we service that need and that demand without necessarily taking that liability onto our balance sheet? We therefore need partnering relationships. We need to find ways to turn around and recognize other NGOs, bigger or smaller, that we can collaborate with to optimize the situation. So in one way, what ends up happening is a hell of a lot of the ego that's involved in this field. And I'm saying ego, not necessarily in the positive sense, because ego channeled right in the correct ways is good. But ego from the point of view of saying, this is mine, this is what I own, these are my beneficiaries, these are my donors. That's going out the window very, very quickly in these times. Because for even the bigger NGOs to survive, we've got to partner up with the other organizations who can help us with the delivery. When we talked about feeding early on 70,000 families, we African didn't do that, we orchestrated it. But my gosh, I would guess that more than 40% of the distribution took place through other NGOs that we collaborated necessarily with.
Mark, I think to add to that, you mentioned collaboration. That's definitely got to happen. I believe there are going to be mergers in the sectors. There's from what I can see, there's still a lot of duplication that will cut out. So you'll get a consolidation, I think, of organizations out there, which sadly, I mean, there are redundancies across every sector, every industry. It's frightening, the figures you're reading. So the charity sector will suffer. The other thing we've got to think about is funders have to have a capital base to give donations. Their earning potential is also compromised at the moment. You know, some big philanthropists, some family officers who may have lost money through this crisis, and therefore they may not be able to give as much in the next few years. So there's going to be a lot of rebalancing going on, and a lot of people are asking those questions: who comes first? How do we do this? So again, another thing we've got to be conscious of. From my point to you, Mark, with Africa Ticum, my commitment to the work I'm doing with you is still there. That's done, and I was delighted to contribute to your food security. So that's done. The money's restricted. It's earmarked, and the work that you do, I love it, and that's why I'm on this call.
Thank
that's
you.
how we met 10 years ago, thanks to the World Cup final. You know.
Yeah.
So maybe just switching, and there are a few questions about this from sort of technology helping with the recipients of the NGOs and the charities to using technology to get to donors. And for someone who works hard at trying to raise money for Africa Ticum, how do we, I think there are a few questions that have come up. Firstly, are there some ways that we can use technology, digital, to get to donors, to do that? And I think there are probably some good ideas I know that Mark's got. But also, how do we make sure, there's a great question here, if I can just find it, which quotes a poem by Robert Frost. And the poem ends with the thought, and I'm quoting here, "And they, being not the ones dead, turned to their affairs." How do we avoid, after all of this has happened, those of us who haven't really suffered any disadvantage, simply turning back to business as usual, to our affairs, when we know that the world is going to be in a pretty dire strait? And so as donors, as reaching potential donors, any good ideas about how we can do that better?
It's a great question.
My 20 cents on this, there'll never be you'll never get back to where we were. It's going to be very, very different. Charity to start with, you know, for me, the most important thing is meeting your partners, going to see the projects, interacting with the beneficiaries on the ground. That's going to be so difficult, not only with restrictions on travel, but also social distancing. And again, a lot of charities not able to deliver in their center, but remotely. So assessing the project is going to become harder. And again, I think donors are going to be more circumspect as to how they give and the level of commitment to organizations. Again, Mark, you said we've got to wait and see. It's a moving feast. One day changes from the next.
But I'll tell you what I think, Christopher, has changed enormously. I think that prior to sort of the situation with COVID, where the demand significantly outstripped the supply of funds available, resources available, etc., donors have become very much more now, almost exclusively, focused around outcomes. The days of saying the quantum that I give defines, how substantial a contribution I'm making are, I think, a thing of the past. I think it's now become a function of the outcome that I am achieving. And therefore, NGOs like ourselves are going to have to be so much more circumspect in establishing performance criteria and establishing what's the outcome that we are going to be able to achieve with the inputs that we get from our donors. So the whole nature of reporting, Gary, is going to change, I believe. We're going to have to be far more accountable for the monies that we receive, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an impact standpoint, which is, again, it's not a bad thing, quite honestly. And it's going to force us all to become a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. Also, I think, to Christopher's point earlier on, I don't think we'll ever go back to normal. I think the new normal is going to be very different because there's not a single human being on this planet whose consciousness has not been shaken by this. We will all think about food, I believe, in a slightly different way again. When we have pictures in our minds of people standing in bread queues that are kilometers long. And I think that the world will become a much more sensitive and receptive place. That's the optimism in me.
Definitely have to stay optimistic. Mark, just a few questions that have come in specifically regarding Africa Tikkun. The first one is that we've got many aims, ECD, early child development, after school careers, learnerships, as well as a whole lot of other services which you've now just added around food security. So it's a kind of a theoretical, but perhaps not that theoretical question, which is, if you were approached by the South African government to tackle one service and to take that nationally, which one would it be? Probably an impossible.
Yeah, it's the cradle. It's an easy answer. It's an easy answer. It's the cradle to career model. We have proved now, having run this concept of early development leading to youth development, leading to career placement, now having implemented it over the last 15 years. And I think probably the most important thing we can do is, in fact, to take that model and determine how can that model be implemented, because it's outcome-based. For so many years, Africa Tikkun has been this organization first to develop early child development. Then we had, frankly speaking, the Belron group who came to the party and gave us the funds to move into youth development. And then Belron came to our support and helped us move into career development. So we've kind of almost been a cost-push organization. We woke up to the fact a couple of years ago that there needed to be a demand for what is the marketplace needing? What are the competencies, the skills, the values? And could we re-engineer backwards? And it was a material change that took place in our entire approach to child and youth development. So in answer to your question, I'm sorry making a long answer, but if government came to us as they have, and we've recently signed a contract just prior to the lockdown, our intent is to take our model and to do an asset review in various different townships, rural communities, determine what does exist in their environment, what are the competencies and skills that they're looking for in terms of employers in that area. It's no good training call center operators in a rural environment that's looking for people with agrarian skills or agri-tech skills. So if you understand, therefore, the logic is to say, how do we change what these geographies will look like in 5 years' time if we re-engineer backwards based on the demands that exist from those communities?
Yeah, I think that's right. And Mark, I'm going to just ask one more question, then I'm going to ask Christopher one more. It's about Africa Tikkun. It seems like in South Africa, less than 10% of NGOs have got some sort of an international arm to help with fundraising. And Africa Tikkun have managed to do that. Is there a lesson there? Is there anything that other, certainly South African charities could perhaps learn from? How easy has it been to have international donors, or to create a platform that international donors can give as well? I don't know your thoughts on that.
It's a biased response because it depends on how competent your family are overseas. And between you and Peter, you in London and Peter in America, quite frankly, and your ability to attract people like Carol and we've been able to be very, very successful. In excess of 20% of our funding a year comes from international sources, and predominantly, if I may be blunt with you, the Belron organization, because Gary, Peter's bought into this belief that by doing good for people in South Africa, you're in fact doing good for people around the globe. It's a necessity, it's an absolute necessity. When your currency devalues, as ours has by as much as 20% in the space of a year, you start to recognize just how valuable hard currency is when you're trying to make an impact. Particularly in a time when you've got such economic contraction that's taking place in South Africa, and our corporate donor base just simply doesn't have the wherewithal to give as they've done previously.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I can add to that, because it isn't plain sailing, and with my hat on as on the Africa Tikkun UK board, raising money for South African charities, frankly, is becoming tougher and tougher. There's a lot of need around the world. Christopher talked about that in Asia, in South America, and South Africa just bluntly isn't as popular as it used to be, certainly in the Mandela era. But that doesn't mean that the need goes away. And it just means that the way that we've got to connect with our donors, both here in the UK, in Europe, and certainly in North America, we're going to have to come up with different ways as well, different methods, different technologies, using these kind of forums to do that, using video, because Christopher's quite right. The days of taking potential donors out to South Africa, I mean, it's just not possible to do that now. And I don't know how long that'll probably last for a long time. So it's a challenging time, I think, certainly for us as the international arm of a South African charity to be raising money in a time of so much need and so much demand. So Christopher, I don't know whether you've got anything more to add about how we could.
I think what I would say, Gary, adding to this, and Mark, is that over the months I've attended many events that charities have put on by Zoom. I normally go to an event every summer that's attended by about 170 people in the City of London. They had 700 people on their Zoom call, managed very similarly to this. They had 700. That would never have happened without technology. Or without COVID, they would never have gone to, let's Zoom other supporters in. So there is the opportunity. Charities can come into your living rooms. I've had recitals, all kinds of things, receptions. Everyone's had a drink in their hand and gone cheers. So it is there, but that's when you know the organisation. It's going to be difficult coming into a new organisation that way. I think it's possible. But it's gonna have its for us, because as you say, we're social beings. You want to have that social interaction. But charities have managed to reinvent themselves and still perform. Big fundraising events will change as well. You can't have a black tie function for 500 people at the Grosvenor House anymore, with huge, with people bidding based on the fact that they've drunk too much or just want to outbid their friend. Those days are, I won't say gone, but there's a big pause, and that's going to have an effect too.
I think that's spot on.
Yeah. Just two quick examples. We were fortunate enough to have been selected by Uber to address a crisis that they had here in South Africa, where some 20,000 of their drivers, lost work, and they wanted to feed their drivers. So we relied on the Pick and Pay organization to issue electronic vouchers. And it was quite remarkable to see how quickly we could set up a system whereby those drivers were able to, using SMS codes, go into Pick and Pay stores and select from an array of different products. It was really interesting to see, quite frankly, instead of handing out food parcels, how different it was handing out a voucher where an individual has the choice of an array of different products, obviously limited to nutritional products and health products, etc. But those, I think, are some of the changes that are going to take place. And that cut out a hell of a lot of physical handling costs that typically would have been engaged. A use of tech by an organization like ours that had never used that type of platform before. So again, I'm quite innovative, and please, before we sort of wind up, I've got to give a punt just quickly for South Africa, because I know, you know, the world sees this corrupt country that has been, you know, in the grip of the Zuma era, and why should you bother to look after, you know, the impoverished in South Africa? And I think probably the strongest argument is because the majority, the large majority of South African youth want to be productive. They've grown up on smartphones, cell phones. Cell phone penetration is one of the highest in the world. That community, given an opportunity, I do believe can bring about massive change very quickly, huge productivity gains in a relatively short period of time. And why is that important beyond the South African borders? Because it becomes a model that can then be emulated in other parts of the world where maybe population size is significantly greater. There's an attitude of mind among South African youth that given an opportunity, they will capitalize on it. They do not want to be on social grants. And when you're working with attitude, as we all know, you're 90% of the way there.
Great. Well, Mark, that's the perfect way to not only to end, but also to introduce next week's webinar, because I think next week's webinar, which we're going to be hosting next Thursday on the 23rd of July, we're going to have Suzanne Ackerman-Berman, who's the Director of Transformation at Pick n Pay, joined by Izzy Obeng, who's the founder of Foundervine, which is an incredible organization of entrepreneurship, which runs startup and scale-up acceleration programs. And I think you're going to see from both of them some of the amazing things that South Africans and South African organizations have been able to get up to. So I just wanted to, before we end off, Christopher, if there was anything you just wanted to say at the end, other than to keep supporting Africa Tikkun, which you've been so instrumental in doing, but perhaps just talk about why. And we saw some of the pictures in that video, some of the libraries that you started funding many years ago that have now sort of evolved into a much more digital way. So perhaps you wouldn't mind just ending off and before you do that, a huge thank you to you for joining us this evening and for your continuing support. But maybe just tell us why it is that Africa Tikkun is so close to your heart.
So close to my heart. Well, it was back when I met Bertie 10 years ago, just after the World Cup finals. You took me to Alex to see the centre there, and we were all euphoric because we were also wearing our Spain shirts. I don't think we'd slept much, and just seeing what you guys had done, what the organisers had done, and this fantastic guy was, you know, he didn't need to do what he was doing, but he did. He started the whole process. And I was taken by it, and the passion. And when you start to understand the country, South Africa, when you understand the needs of the township and the people there, what Africa Tikkun is doing in those townships is sensational, not just from the library point of view now, which is something I got into. I think we started the libraries 4 years ago. It was the whole learning. And I remember that story when Alex was burgled and they stole some computers. The township went nuts, and within 24 hours those computers are back, because they were saying, don't you rob our people, you're taking it, you know. And suddenly it changed, and it's brought a community together. I think that's key in these very marginalized areas, and it's just in the belief, and I think the way the libraries have evolved. And we were talking about a digital delivery. I was with Onyi talking about in January, saying let's look at digital delivery, and suddenly COVID hits us, and we were kind of there thinking that, and it's now very much apparent on it. I hope the libraries will eventually be filled with learners again, and the libraries have evolved. They've become much more modern, much more colourful, much more spacious. And funny enough, that's exactly what you need today. We need more space because you'll need distancing. So I'm a big fan of Africa Tikkun, everybody, and I'm a big fan of South Africa. It's the most beautiful country, the hinterland, safari, everything like that. It's all there. But there's some wonderful NGO work going on, and I'm very happy offline to engage with anybody about the work that I'm involved with various hats on in South Africa or anywhere else in the world. There, Gary mentioned the charities that I preside over. Please, I'm very happy to engage with people. Don't all write at once though, please. But thank you. I've enjoyed this. Thank you for inviting me. At the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. Now I've done it. It was definitely the right thing to do. So thank you to the Lubna family and the whole team, and for everyone for attending from far and wide. Something that wouldn't have happened without the invention of webinars. We wouldn't have had such a diverse audience from such a large geographical platform. So thank you, everybody, and good luck. And as I say, this will pass. And be safe, be careful.
Thank you, Christopher. And again, thanks for joining us and for all your support. Really appreciate it. Mark, some closing comments. You've got a couple of minutes.
Well, obviously, just a huge thank you to everybody showing any interest and enthusiasm. What was so pleasing for me to hear from Christopher was, this personal connection, because I think that's what it's really all about. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, having a human existence, and none of us really sleep easy at night when we know that there are others who are either out in the cold and haven't had a meal on the day. So this ability to be able to give is in fact a gift. And when we share that gift in the manner in which we are creating a movement of people around the planet, I just feel that we as human beings are evolving and becoming more enlightened and just much more aware, please God. And it's an absolute pleasure, quite frankly, for all of us at Tikkun to be able to engage with people like Christopher, like yourself, Gary. Our lives are enriched through your involvement with us, not just your financial involvement with us, but your personal involvement. So thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. And one final, I have 3 words: learn, earn, return. And that to me, what it's all about. And I'm at that point in my life that I can return, and I'm still learning, and I've still got to earn. But it's a lovely full circle, that, when you think about it.
Well, that's great. And using that, I really hope that you'll all return next Thursday to listen to Suzanne and Izzy, who will bring a different perspective, more from an entrepreneurial business point of view. We'll carry on this discussion. Thank you so much for all your questions. We've tried to answer most of them, but what I can assure you is that we will answer those that haven't been answered live. We'll send you written answers. There have also been a number of different requests for hooking up afterwards, for linking up, and we'll make sure that we do all of that as well. Really appreciate everyone's involvement and staying with us for the full hour. Hope you've enjoyed it, and really very much look forward to seeing you all next Thursday for our part 2 of 3 in the series. Thanks a lot, and good night to everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, everybody.
Good night.